At Desert Pine Storage and Auction, two brothers showed up the way working people always do when they're trying to buy themselves a little oxygen. They weren't thrill seekers, and they weren't chasing a fantasy. They ran a small repair business, stayed booked, stayed honest, and still watched the numbers refuse to cooperate. Every time they got one bill under control, another one appeared behind it. They came with a strict limit and one simple promise to each other: no ego bids, no chasing, no getting pulled into the crowd's energy. If the price went past their line, they would walk, even if the unit looked good. Most of the doors that morning confirmed why they'd made that rule. A mattress leaning against a wall, bags of clothes that smelled like storage, busted furniture, dusty electronics no one wanted to touch. The regular bidders moved fast, joking with each other, reading the first row like a menu, then raising their hands without even blinking. The brothers stayed quiet and watched. They weren't studying treasure. They were studying people, trying to learn what makes experienced buyers lean in and what makes them step back. Then the auctioneer stopped at a faded blue door, marked B47, and rolled it up. From the front, it looked like trouble. Heavy furniture, big black trash bags, and the kind of mess that can turn into dump fees before it turns into profit. A few people immediately lost interest. But the deeper the brothers looked, the more something fell off in a good way. The clear totes were stacked like someone cared. The contractor bins were the black ones with yellow lids, lined up in a neat row and labeled with white tape. There was a gray safe tucked to the side, and at the very back sat a tall machine with a keypad and an empty screen, shaped like something that didn't belong in a normal storage unit. Someone in the crowd muttered that it looked like an ATM. A few bidders laughed, called it scrap, and started drifting away. That should have been the end of it. But the brothers couldn't unsee the one detail that mattered most. This unit wasn't packed like junk. It was packed like someone meant to come back for it. And that made the safe, the bins, and the machine in the back feel less like random leftovers and more like a story that got interrupted. The bidding started and almost died on the spot. The auctioneer dropped the opening number, then dropped again. One guy tossed in a bid like he was testing the water, and that's when the older brother finally raised his hand. Not because he felt lucky, but because he saw value even in the worst case. The bins alone had resale. The furniture could be cleaned and listed. The machine was heavy steel and parts. The safe, even empty, had value. The price climbed just under their limit. The other bidder hesitated, did the mental math on labor and hauling, and let it go. The gavel came down. Sold. Inside the office, paperwork made it official in the most ordinary way. The manager slid the contract over, took the cash, and handed them a key with the kind of tone people use when they've seen too many stories to care about another one. She mentioned, almost casually, that the renter had been there for years and then suddenly stopped paying. Nobody came to ask about the unit. Nobody tried to settle the balance. Nobody even called. The line landed heavier than it should have. Long-term renters don't just vanish from their own stuff unless something changes fast. Back at the unit, they rolled the door up just enough to stand at the threshold and take it in without stepping inside. Up close, the order felt even more intentional. The labels on the black and yellow bins were still too far to read, but they were placed like inventory, not storage. The safe sat quiet in the corner with dust on its face, and the tall machine in the back looked more and more like exactly what the crowd had said it was. The brothers didn't celebrate. They didn't talk big. They locked it back up and walked away with the key in their pocket, because in that moment they understood the truth. They hadn't bought a fun weekend project. They had bought someone's unfinished business. The next morning they came back with a dolly, work gloves, and that tight, quiet focus people get when they know the day might decide a whole season of their life. They started at the front, clearing the light stuff first, because you don't survive a unit like that by rushing to the back. Cardboard boxes gave up normal things. Holiday bins, kitchen appliances, old blankets, a couple of decent tools that made them exchange a look. Then they tipped one dresser forward to move it, and the older brother's hand froze under the bottom drawer. Someone had taped an envelope flat against the underside like they were hiding it from the world and from themselves. The tape was old, yellowed, but the envelope held its shape. When they peeled it free and opened it, they didn't get a movie stack of perfect hundreds. They got something more believable and more shocking for men who count every bill. Mixed cash, folded and worn, stacked in a way that said it had been saved and handled, not flashed. Enough to make them stop breathing for a second. They didn't count it there. They didn't celebrate. They slid it into a bag, zipped it, and kept moving like nothing happened, because that's what you do when you're afraid of jinxing a rare break. The finds started coming in a pattern that felt too steady to be luck. In a small broken jewelry box buried under costume chains, they found a thin gold necklace and a heavy man's ring with a square stone that caught the light hard. Inside the band were initials, cleanly engraved, the kind of detail that instantly turns valuable into personal. That was the first time the younger brother hesitated, because it stopped feeling like flipping junk and started feeling like touching someone's private life. The older brother didn't push him. He only said they'd keep anything like that aside until they understood what they were dealing with. They put the ring and necklace into a separate container and kept going. Then one of the clear totes changed the whole mood. The label said office devices do not throw, and it weighed like metal instead of towels. Inside were card readers, pin pads, small security cameras still in foam, and a point-of-sale control unit like you'd see under a counter at a gas station. Practical value, real resale, and suddenly the unit didn't look like a random household anymore. It looked like part of a small business that had been shut down mid-breath. The deeper they dug, the clearer it got. Behind a tied contractor bag that should have held trash, they found binders, thick ones, labeled by year with the same company name. The pages were invoices and service logs for ATM maintenance and deployment, contracts with convenience stores, handwritten lists of machine locations. Tucked inside one binder was a technician badge with a photo of a tired middle-aged man and a title that matched the paperwork. The younger brother read a few lines, then looked up at the back of the unit where that tall machine waited in the shadows. Now it made sense, and somehow that made it more uncomfortable, not less. It took them another hour to clear a path, but when they finally got a clean view, the machine was exactly what it had looked like from the start. An older freestanding ATM, power cord clipped close, the cut end wrapped in tape like someone didn't want it plugged in by accident. Near it, buried under tools, they found several small metal boxes that looked like removable cash cassettes. Some were light. Some had a stubborn weight that made both brothers go quiet. They didn't open anything right there. Not with people walking past. Not with cameras on the lane. Not with their own nerves already tight. That's when the facility manager rolled by on a squeaky cart and leaned into the doorway like he was only making conversation. He made a comment about progress. Then his eyes flicked to the ATM and to the black and yellow bins. And for half a second his face tightened, as if he recognized more than he wanted to say. He reminded them to clear the unit on time, then added, almost under his breath, that some units are the kind you don't want to miss anything in. He drove off, but the brothers stayed still, because now they had the same thought at the same time. This wasn't just heavy furniture and bins. This was money equipment, business records, and closed containers inside closed containers. The kind of unit that doesn't end up abandoned unless something goes wrong fast. They locked up for the night with a safe they hadn't opened, cassettes they didn't trust in public, and paperwork that made the whole unit feel like a sealed vault. And sitting in the driver's seat on the way home, the younger brother finally said what neither of them wanted to admit out loud. If that ATM ever held cash, then somewhere in this mess was either a lifeline or the reason the owner never came back. By morning, the little fire safe sat on their kitchen table like it owned the room. They hired a licensed locksmith because neither brother wanted to turn a strange find into a stupid mistake. The locksmith checked their paperwork from the auction, filled out a simple form, then worked the dial with the bored patience of a man who had opened 100 safes for people who forgot their own codes. When the door finally gave with a muted clunk, it wasn't diamonds and movie drama. It was the kind of quiet, organized stash that made their stomachs drop for a different reason. Thick envelopes banded by month and year, a tray of rolled coins and bank wrappers, a slim black notebook, and a key ring with 5 color tag keys labeled with locations and one set of initials that matched the company name in those binders. They counted the envelopes after the locksmith left. It was real cash, stacked clean, enough to make both brothers sit down and stare for a moment before saying anything. The notebook mattered even more. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. Each page tracked ATM loads, service stops, cassette swaps, shortages, overages, little notes about jams and audits, all written by someone who had been trying to keep a collapsing business from falling apart. Suddenly the unit didn't feel random at all. It felt like a life that had stopped mid-shift. They went back to the storage yard that afternoon and worked behind their roll-up door with the kind of privacy that makes hard decisions easier. One by one, they matched cassette codes to the ledger. Two opened empty, like the note said they would. A third gave up a few crumpled bills stuck sideways. The fourth was the one the ledger had flagged, and it opened against pressure, the lid lifting as if it had been holding its breath. Inside were strapped stacks, tight and uniform, the kind of cash you only see in bank drawers. The younger brother counted twice with the same careful fingers he used on invoices. When he finished, he said the number quietly, as if saying it too loud would make it disappear. $9,000 from one cassette, on top of what they'd already found in the safe. That was the moment the unit stopped being a weird story and became a responsibility. They knew they could blow it fast. They also knew they could do something smarter than most people ever get the chance to do. Turn a strange break into a clean reset. They got the jewelry appraised instead of taking the first low offer, learned what the ring and chain were actually worth, and kept every piece of paper they touched. Then they sat with a lawyer for one uncomfortable hour, because the ledger and the cassettes weren't just property. They were business assets that had fallen through the cracks. The advice was simple and boring, which is exactly what they needed. Document everything. Send certified letters to the last known contacts tied to the company. Wait a reasonable window. Pay taxes on what they kept. Don't act like men hiding a secret. Weeks passed without anyone legitimate stepping forward, and the one family contact they reached didn't demand anything. They only confirmed the technician had died with more debts than friends, and that the storage payments had stopped when everything else stopped. When the waiting period ended and the lawyer gave them the green light, the brothers finally let themselves add the numbers like grown men who had spent their lives avoiding calculators because the truth was usually painful. Between the safe cash, the cassette money, the sale of the ATM parts to a refurbisher, and the resale of the point-of-sale equipment to small shops that actually needed it, they cleared a little over $80,000 after the dust and fees and taxes took their bite. They didn't turn into different people overnight. They stayed in the same boots, drove the same truck, and worked the same way. The difference was that the bills stopped chasing them. They wiped the high-interest debt first, paid off the tool credit line that had been draining them monthly, fixed the truck properly instead of just enough, and put a full year of bare-bones living expenses into savings with a note that basically said, "Do not touch unless the world catches fire." Then they used what was left to do something they talked about for years, but never had room to risk. They made their skills a business, not a grind. They registered a small service company focused on ATMs, kiosks, and point-of-sale systems, took a community college course in low-voltage work, and started knocking on the back doors of corner stores with an offer that was simple and honest. Reliable repairs, fair pricing, no games. A few months later, a grocery owner paid them in cash and oranges and told them, laughing, that nobody fixed machines like that anymore. The next month, a pharmacy had them replace a broken card reader and called them back 2 days later for another job. By the end of the year, they were still working hard, but the work finally felt like it was building something instead of swallowing them. They even went back to the storage facility once, not to gamble again, but because management wanted a small ATM installed in the office lobby. The manager, suddenly careful and polite, said he knew a couple of guys who did things straight. The brothers mounted the unit, wired it cleanly, and walked out with a signed service contract and a quiet sense of irony they didn't need to say out loud. Their miracle wasn't just the money. It was the way it gave them room to make normal choices again. It gave them sleep that didn't feel like a negotiation. It gave them the ability to say no to bad jobs, yes to better ones, and to look at the future without that familiar pressure in the chest. The storage unit had been someone else's unfinished story, packed in bins and ledgers and machines that held cash. The brothers didn't pretend it was pure. They just refused to let it make them reckless. And that's why their ending was happy in the most believable way. Not a mansion, not a lottery life, just a steady one. Bills paid, work they could stand behind, a business built with their hands. A rare, strange break handled carefully enough to become a foundation instead of a curse.